Welcome to the G5 Hive and our next installment of our Worker Bee series, where we deep dive into the G5 college football landscape, the folks that know the teams the best. For watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. If you're listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review. Today we'll be heading over to Conference USA and taking a look at newcomer to FBS football, the Delaware Fighting Blue Hens, who finished 9-2 last season. No postseason for Delaware as they transitioned to FBS. Made them ineligible. They wrapped up their 2025 spring practice with their annual blue and white spring game on April 18th. We have a special guest joining us today. He is a writer for Hero Sports FCS. He is a 2025 Delaware graduate via Syracuse. He covers Delaware athletics. He is the co-host of the Feathers and Field Goals podcast. He is Daniel Steenkamer. Daniel can be found on X at Dan Steenkamer. Welcome to the show, Daniel.
Well, Luke, thanks so much for the introduction. And it was really a great feeling there, getting like the PA announcer vibe from that. I don't think I ever got my own name announced in Delaware Stadium. I did some announcing in Delaware Stadium over the student radio airwaves, but that was really awesome. So thanks so much for having me, because this will be really fun. It's my first chance a little bit to talk Delaware football in podcast form. So this is great.
Well, before we get to the football aspect of it, for those who are just tuning in to the G5 Hive for the first time, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how long you've been covering Delaware football?
Well, it all starts, I've been going to Delaware football games my entire life. Being from the state of Delaware, having family attending football games, growing up, it's just the hometown team for me, and just being part of the community all these years. So I wound up going to the University of Delaware for school after spending my first season in football terms at Syracuse in the ACC, then got back home to Delaware and covered FCS football while at UD for Hero Sports. I'd actually started covering Delaware for Hero in the 2019 fall season while I was in high school in the state of Delaware. So I guess this goes up to season 6 officially, if I'm counting correctly, with covering Delaware football in some form or fashion, and doing that most directly with Feathers and Field Goals, the podcast that I co-host that you so graciously pointed out, shouted out. So appreciate that. But yeah, it's been a number of years now where I guess I'd be like a 6th-year senior if we're putting it in terms of years of covering it in one way or another, covering the team. So see a number of different head coaches, and have enjoyed watching the football though all this time. It's really been all consuming in a lot of ways, and getting me started in my time in college and in my career.
Well, let's move over to some Blue Hens football. And for those not familiar with Delaware's offensive style, how would you describe it?
Well, led by head coach Ryan Carty, an offensive guy. Coach Carty was once a backup quarterback on the Blue Hens roster and was on that team that won the FCS national title in 2003. So he spent time offensive coordinating at New Hampshire and Sam Houston before getting back to Delaware as a head coach. And it's going to be a spread attack. It's going to spread out the defense horizontally, usually 3 receiver sets. The tight end in the Delaware offense is expected to be able to catch the football as well. So in one sense, it certainly may be perceived as a pass-heavy attack, and that is the case in some ways when you look at the numbers and the ability of the quarterbacks to be pretty productive in this system. And it's been a variety of quarterbacks already at Delaware who have, I think, really enjoyed Coach Carty's system. But also, Delaware prides itself on being balanced and multiple too, which sounds like a cliche, but Coach Carty's definition of balanced is that you're able to equally run and pass the ball when needed, and you're able to make the right choice on RPOs and things like that. It's not necessarily a definition of balance where you look down at the stat sheet and was it 50-50 run and pass? Was it evenly distributed in terms of the yards? This definition of balance in this offense is, are we able to, as needed, run and throw the ball given on the down and distance? So that's really, I think, part of the identity of the offense. It's a lot about explosive plays, X plays, they call it in Coach Carty's offense. That's going to be one of the 3 main factors that win or lose games for Delaware. You'll hear them say X plays, turnovers, and negative plays created on defense, or havoc plays. So on offense, you really want to be able to push the ball down the field vertically, explosive plays, but also some creative swinging gate and muddles formation type plays here and then, split the offensive lineman out wide and get a little bit creative and put people in conflict. So some of those is the coach beat coming through, but that's part of the aggressive go forward on 4th down, throw the rock around and spread you out kind of identity of the Delaware offense.
Well, Daniel, let's get to the position where it all starts on offense, and that's the quarterback. Delaware took a hit when two-year starter Ryan O'Connor decided to step away from the team and pursue other opportunities. However, not all is lost, as O'Connor has battled injuries in those seasons. During his absence, fans saw Zach Marker and Nick Minicucci take snaps. Daniel, how did this quarterback room look to you in the spring?
Well, it starts with Zach Marker in the post Ryan O'Connor era. It starts with Zach Marker. He was the quarterback who came into Delaware from an Iowa junior college. Marker is from the state of Iowa and is one of I think is the only Iowa native I can think of who I've seen in my lifetime watching Delaware football who's been on the Delaware football roster, just out of Iowa. Now, he may not factually be the only one, but it's a unique storyline coming from the Midwest to Delaware. And he was part of a quarterback competition. Marker was back in 2023 versus O'Connor. They split time to begin the 2023 season, did O'Connor and Marker, but it wound up that Marker got banged up at Penn State in that 2023 early fall season for Delaware, and Ryan O'Connor primarily handling it from there. But Zach Marker was right there. I really viewed him as a QB 1B with a 1A QB and Ryan O'Connor. So now you look at Zach Marker as he's come off a season where Delaware was preserving him a little bit. He wasn't all the way back, coming back from a knee injury and a knee procedure last offseason. So now you look at Zach Marker coming into this year, it's a question of, based on spring, it looked more like the original Zach Marker, the pre-injuries Zach Marker, and a player who can kind of be a preliminary, I don't want to say presumptive because nothing's certainly officially formalized, but I look at Zach Marker as that QB who's going to lead the Delaware offense coming into this inaugural FBS season. But Nick Minicucci has spent exhaustive time also at QB in games for Delaware from a pretty young age as a college starter. Nick Minicucci has been a successful third quarterback. I mean, it's hard to imagine, quite honestly, if you told us going into Coach Carty's tenure, I mean, he is a QB's guy, an offensive guy, but the sheer number of three quarterbacks who have played at a starter level for Delaware, that includes Minicucci playing a lot last season and being pressed into service as early as 2023 in the FCS playoffs. O'Connor and Marker are out, and Nick Minicucci has to lead Delaware in what turned out to be a gut-wrenching comeback win over Lafayette in the FCS playoffs. You throw on the video of Nick Minicucci against Lafayette in the FCS playoffs, and that's a good example of kind of the gutsy performance that Nick Minicucci can bring. He's mobile enough, a bigger guy as well, but can extend plays and throw on the run. And I think it was just impressive to see how well Nick Minicucci, with some younger player type mistakes in his time so far, but how well, in spite of that, he's been able to hold his own really in pressured situations. So I think in Delaware, having Marker and Minicucci back at the kind of top of the returnee depth chart, that's pretty major for Delaware to have that peace of mind as it gets into this FBS year.
We talked about Zach kind of having the lead there for quarterback one, or you believe he will be that quarterback one. For those not familiar, have never watched a Fighting Blue Hens game, how would you describe Zach's playing style?
In this offense, the QB does need to be able to be on the move. O'Connor was more of a pocket type with the ability to extend as needed, but Marker can be a little bit more fleet of foot, and he's pretty quick. He can tuck it and go as long as everything's feeling healthy and full systems go. Zach Marker can definitely do everything that's needed in this Delaware offense. He was hyper efficient in one of his starts. I can remember back in 2023, it would have been, I think, at Towson. Marker completed, I think it was like 16 of his 16 first passes. I mean, he was just on timing, in rhythm, really in sync with this variety of receivers. I mean, Delaware wants to spread it around to a variety of different pass catchers. It might not be any one player emerging with an outsized reception share if the Delaware offense is as healthy as it can be with Marker. So I think Zach Marker, he's mobile. He's not an overpoweringly large QB. I mean, he's really a QB you can imagine sort of having that JUCO background. He's not some absolutely imposing presence, but what he is just he's tough because he's definitely gone through from last season. He had to really gut it out and play as he went through his I would say finish of recovery from previous injury. And so he's a player who's going to be able to do everything that Delaware needs, I think. I mean, my expectations are pretty high. He's a pocket guy, but he's able to be on the design, sprint out, QB rollout, do all the play action you need, run the RPOs that are the base of the Delaware offense. So it'll just be interesting to see if you can get a full sample size of Zach Marker for a year, because it's coming more fits and starts just because it feels like Delaware has had to turn to different QBs at different times. And part of that was making sure that Zach Marker had his eligibility all set and ready for this fall as well.
Well, Riley Trujillo was added after the spring from UCF. How do you see him fitting into this room?
Riley Trujillo, a guy who just adds to Delaware's uh, current run of having players come from the state of Florida, which I know is a big deal for Delaware in Conference USA, having the conference footprint that includes the Sunshine State and be able to recruit down that way and throughout the Southeast. And I think that from looking at the high school scouting report, it really matches what the kind of archetype is of the Delaware QB, like a Marker and a Minakuchi, a player who can really exploit in the run game and carry it himself. But that's not the primary function per se either of the Delaware QB, because you don't necessarily have to have a cannon for an arm, but can you, win those open access one-on-one throws? And can you really embrace a system that's kind of complicated in terms of the variety and the wide breadth of plays that are run out of the shotgun. I mean, it's a shotgun offense, so you do have to be able to, take a quick drop and make quick throws and make quality decisions. That's for sure. And from reading about Riley Trujillo and taking a look at his UCF practice footage, I really think that he's going to fit that mold. I think they know what they're getting in a relatively young player. They know the developmental capability, and it'll be interesting to see in fall camp. Really, I'm really looking forward to fall, because that's where, hey, there's going to be a bit of pushing and a bit of competition and a bit of seeing how this transfer fits into the QB room. That's really historically been a pretty busy QB room. I mean, there's a lot of competition. I think there's a lot of demand to play for Coach Carty and for QB's coach, Sean Goldrich. Sean Goldrich played for Coach Carty back at New Hampshire. So I think the reputation has been pretty well established, but now it's been tested. Now it'll be tested in the FBS. How will Delaware's offense and its QBs hold up in this next level? And given that Riley Trujillo comes from a Power 5 program, that's going to, or excuse me, Power 4 program, I'm not counting him out for a second. I mean, I talked about Zach Marker earlier, but I can't count out the possibility that this young signal caller comes in and can contribute much the way that Minakuchi had to play so quickly as a youngster too.
Well, let's move over to the running game. And this room lost their leading rusher from a season ago, Marcus Yarns. He's off to the NFL. He signed a UDFA contract with the Saints. This room also saw Quincy Watson and Kalen Costello graduate. That means 180 attempts, 1,061 yards, and 10 touchdowns are up for grabs in 2025. This room sees the return of their second and third leading rusher from a year ago, and Jonathan Silver and Saeed St. Fleur. What were your takeaways from the running back room this spring?
Well, one of the first takeaways is just it's an easy storyline to point out for Delaware in the big shoes of Marcus Yarns, a guy who was able to run routes as a receiver and line up in the slot and just be I look at him as a long strides, can really put his foot in the ground, and Yarns got up field in a hurry. I mean, his straightaway speed is pretty impressive. So there's a reason that he's getting a crack with the Saints. But I think I was reflecting on it this spring, and really, Joe Silver is a player who probably was overshadowed by the stardom of Yarns and Silver's underlying numbers. I say underlying just because Yarns' numbers were getting the spotlight, and rightfully so. But Silver was efficient as well. And Jonathan Silver is a player who is a bit of a bigger back, and I think is pretty much a guy who can be used in near the goal line, but also on first down. I mean, I would expect Silver to be the first player to get a carry against Delaware State in the opener for the Blue Hens. I think you can see with the way Delaware signaled it a little bit, not that anybody's anointed when we're talking here in July, but Silver will be one of the Blue Hens representing Delaware at CUSA Media Day. So I do think that it's a credit to Silver too, that he didn't necessarily look to pivot or transfer out of Delaware just because Marcus Yarns was evolving into the player that he became, and became really a steady RB1 who was a Swiss Army knife in the offense and found himself on the field in so many different ways, where Delaware's offense is more of a single back offense. A lot of times there is a tight end who can play a fullback type in blocking or lead blocking, but there can be two running backs sometimes flanking the quarterback in the shotgun. So I don't want to speak in too broad strokes, but for the type of spread offense we're talking about, if we're talking maybe 11 personnel, yeah, I mean, Marcus Yarns was on the field, and Silver, when Yarns was banged up or was rotating out, you saw Silver first. So expectations are high for Joe Silver to go on and be that first ball carrier for Delaware. But it's a rotation. We'll talk about it a little later, I think, but it's a rotation of running backs and of receivers. They're going to rotate it in pretty quickly over the course of the game, because it'll be a tempo offense as well, I should mention. So they're not going to huddle. They're not going to be in an excessive rush if it's a neutral game script, but there's not going to be a huddle. It's going to be pretty quickly with the inputted play calls, and they're going to be on to the next snap pretty quickly. I mean, it's gonna go. So they're going to see Silver rotate in first, is what I'm getting at. Not to ramble like a running back on too much here, but right. I do think that Joe Silver will be the first to get the opportunities, and he may turn some heads because if his video game rating is anything to glean from, I mean, I think EA had a pretty high opinion of him to start out. So I do think that should show up in real life on the turf too.
In Coach Archer's first season as offensive coordinator, he used mainly a 4-back rotation with Yarns kind of being the primary ball carrier there, getting 47% of the running back carriers. Do you expect to see more of the same in 2025? Is it going to be 4 guys? Is it going to be 3 guys? And I'm assuming Silver is going to be the lead guy.
I do expect Silver to take the charge at the lead spot, but it really be, I would say, the prior usage of Yarns was just dictated by how strong of a player Marcus Yarns was and is. So I don't think that there's necessarily one model for the weight or the burden that any one RB1 is going to carry. If Silver has the hottest hand from the very get-go, then he'll earn his carries, that's for sure. But I do think Saeed St. Fleur is another player with a lot of potential for Delaware too, who's gotten in games as a younger player and is kind of climbing up the depth chart over years too, and kind of be the running mate with Silver, kind of that Silver and St. Fleur combination that rolls off the tongue so well. So I think that that's another spot on the depth chart not to overlook either, because Delaware is going to be at its best when it can withstand a certain number of, I mean, you're never wishing for the injuries, but it's like you think about the way Delaware is going to be tested physically going in through the consecutive weeks of FBS play later in the season. And so it'll only help that Delaware has options to turn to, but I don't think there'll necessarily be any one prescription for, well, we don't want necessarily to have the RB1 or the starting running back go over 50% of the carries. I think it's more, hey, if this is the player who we can count on to protect the ball, have the ball security, Delaware calls it heart when the ball's up against the the heart and the chest and high and tight for its ball security. They call that heart. So whoever shows the most heart and is protecting the football and able to certainly pass protect and be a big part of helping Delaware throw the ball around the yard too. I mean, these running backs need to be able to, Marcus Yarns was not afraid of sitting back and protecting the QB as he steps and throws too. So I think that's something that's where whoever's most well-rounded back, and I guess that applies to most programs, but especially in this situation where there's certainly a lot of pressure and eyes on the post-Yarns running back situation, whoever handles that the best by being the best well-rounded back is going to wound up, I think, taking most of the carries.
You did a good job kind of explaining the skill set that Silver brings to the table. How would you describe St. Fleur's skill set, or maybe what he excels at best?
I really want to see more of him. But I do think and I don't mean more of him like a better play. I just mean more snaps, in game action. But I think that the size is not quite as big as Silver, as I'm thinking the two right now. But I would say that St. Fleur, he can kick it into gear too. He's going to be, both running backs are going to bring the speed to the table. I think it'll be interesting to see how St. Fleur adjusts to the FBS size defenses week in and week out too. And a lot of that may also depend on vision and the ability to be patient enough to let the Delaware offensive line blocking pick up and not try to shoulder too much or necessarily learn too quickly what it's like to try to break that many tackles against full FBS rosters week after week. So I think that for St. Fleur, it's really a role where I think we're going to find out this fall more about what he's most destined for when he's besides Joe Nathan Silver, because I would have thought of St. Fleur previously as the third running back in the picture. So with Yarns and Silver getting the first dibs, so to speak, it's still a little bit more of, I don't want to cast early judgment on St. Fleur, but I think from the very beginning, it was kind of clear just from what I've seen in different practices and seeing in times where St. Fleur got in games that, he's going to be a player who Delaware is going to give absolutely a shot to, because Quincy Watson was in the picture too, you mentioned. So I guess honestly, St. Fleur was even like a fourth running back. So it was pretty crowded in the running back room. So I do think that this is St. Fleur, a player's name I've had circled for a little while. And that's going to be a time this fall where we get to find out what he's made of in more full scope. But I do think that Silver, to compare the two more succinctly, Silver will be the bigger back, who can really, I think, between the tackles especially, and then St. Fleur is going to be asked to do that, but also stretch things out as well and get a little bit sideline to sideline.
Well, Daniel, despite losing their top wideout from a season ago in Phil Lutz to graduation, this wide receiving room returns many of the 2024 contributors. This room is highlighted by the return of Jake Thaw, who is second on the team in receptions with 41, yards 336, and touchdowns with 5. How did this group look in the spring?
Yeah, wide receiver is a major part of the style of the Delaware offense that I was describing when we were first getting started here, because it is pretty impressive the number of receivers Delaware's brought in by transfer and then have had success with. I think back to Chandler Harvin, who came from Sam Houston to Delaware and was very successful. You look at another transfer. I mean, Phil Lutz, you mentioned, was originally actually a transfer from Tufts below the Division I level, and he winds up really proving himself in the 2024 season that you mentioned. So this Carty Archer combination, this head coach and OC combination, has had a pretty good run and proof of concept in having receivers who enjoy playing at Delaware. And I think Jake Thaw is the scoring headliner with Lutz not coming back. I do think that Jake Thaw, the way he's able to stretch the end zone is pretty impressive. I mean, you see Thaw on some of the touchdown catches from 2024 really force defenses to cover pylon to pylon in the end zone. That's part of Delaware being a wide open offense is having players like Jake Thaw, who profile as a special teams type returner. Jake Thaw will catch punts for Delaware and return them. So he's a slot receiver mold, but Delaware is moving its receivers all over the field. I mean, as much as I've even had conversations with coach at times, I mean, they may look like a slot receiver and play there more often, but they're capable of being put like the chess pieces kind of all over the place and need to be able to switch through the different spots, the field side or the boundary side of the offense. So that applies to Jake Thaw too. He's going to be, I think, the biggest name to start, and then we'll find out if Thaw really assumes the type of wide receiver one production, but he's going to get a lot of time. I mean, coming in from Michigan, I mean, it's another transfer I should mention. He's originally the Michigan transfer to Delaware and getting the winged helmet on in Newark too for Jake. So I do think that Thaw is a good example of a headlining receiver. Max Patterson is coming back this season, coming in originally from Rutgers to Delaware. And that's a very well-established Rutgers and UD pipeline with the transfer history under Coach Carty. Carty being a New Jersey guy, Rutgers right there, and the connections and relationships there. So Max Patterson is another receiver who, it's strange, his talent didn't match the necessarily the number of opportunities, or I mean, he was on the field, but I just think the catches of the yards that are going to come from Max Patterson this year. I think that's a pretty safe bet. He should be a starter level player. But Delaware brought in another Rutgers receiver transfer in Thomas Amankwa as well here this offseason. So the name of the game at receiver is they're going to rotate a ton of players in. We'll see the starting receivers, and they should include Thaw and Patterson. But I do think that there will be a variety of receivers who are coming into the game, because if Delaware is playing with the number of snaps it wants to have on offense per game, you want to have receivers who are running a high number of routes in their route tree, but then can rotate out and have fresh legs come in. So that's sort of the mold of the Delaware receiver room. It's going to be a who's who of pass catchers if everything is going well and you're able to distribute the ball with as much versatility as Delaware would like. So I do think that Thaw and Patterson will be headliners. And that's really where it starts at the top of my head. I may be missing even I don't want to miss. Jakari Kelly, I should also mention, a slot receiver, a speedster who I think will help replace JoJo Bermudez, who Delaware lost to transfer to Temple here in this offseason. JoJo Bermudez was one of the fastest players I've seen carry the rock for Delaware. I mean, you talk about speed sweeps, or jet sweeps in the Delaware offense. That was JoJo Bermudez. Maybe Jakari Kelly, who's back with Delaware and was originally a Delaware recruited player here for this fall. Maybe Jakari Kelly will, as he gets older in this program, take some more of those jet sweeps and those run plays from the receiver position, because that's part of the versatility of the offense as well. So I like Thaw, Patterson, Kelly, and Amankwa is one of the transfers I should mention, along with Brandon Raymond out of West Virginia. So another power level player being an FBS transfer to Delaware to join the receiver room that also has another original transfer from last year in Nick LeBoy, who was very productive at Cornell. You'll see Delaware get a good number of the Ivy League transfers, maybe some graduates from Ivy League programs looking to continue playing. And Nick LeBoy's a receiver I wanted to touch on as well. A bigger receiver, one who can play on the outside and really win on the outside, I think. As much as I said they don't want to pigeonhole the receivers, I think Nick LeBoy is a player who's, like Patterson, is going to have a chance to have his talent equate to more in terms of production this fall.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, Lutz has graduated That means that 69 targets are vacant from 2024. How do you see those targets getting divided up?
Coach Cardio is always saying the ball finds energy, and energy is a talent. And so whoever brings the energy or the energy on the field is sort of like the PC answer. And whoever is reliably finding room in the defense, I do think that it's a good bet that Thal is going to be an every down type of player. I mean, the ability for him to be a reliable resource on third downs and in the red zone, I think that'll be particularly notable for Delaware. But I do think that as things evolve and Delaware figures out what life is like after Lutz and after Bermudez, we'll see kind of how some of these roles solidify for the newcomers and for who I'd like to see even more of, Patterson and LeBoy. So I do think that there's a handful of 4 or 5, I guess we've named and I've talked about in the last couple of minutes, who are going to be at the starting gate, be those players to start out. But I even missed another transfer from just a moment ago in terms of Kyrie Duplessis out of Coastal Carolina. And that's a situation where Delaware's been able to pull in a couple coastal transfers this offseason. And I think that there's been a track record of, pretty much plug and play receiver types that transfer. And I'm really harping on it because it's been noticeable. I mean, Joshua Youngblood came in from Kansas State, Rutgers, and then transferring to Delaware. And Joshua Youngblood was a pretty electrifying receiver and specialist for UD. So there's a history where I think this is an attractive place for receivers to come transfer and get acclimated and start going and just start clicking and understand that the QB talent has been there from the time Coach Carty arrived. So I do think that makes it where it's a competitive wide receiver room, and it's going to be very much not survival of the fittest, but we'll see who emerges. Even like a sophomore, Sean Wilson, who is one of my favorite under the radar, maybe not even under the radar once people get to him on the video game, kind of under the radar types who fits the mold. I mean, Sean Wilson fits the MO or fits the description for a Delaware receiver. I mean, his hands look really reliable from what I've seen in different practices, and I think he's going to show the burst as well to beat people deep too, because Delaware likes to take its shots. It's an aggressive offense, so shots will be taken vertically deep downfield. And Sean Wilson, he's going to wear number 18 again, and he's out of Alpharetta, Georgia, in that CUSA footprint for Delaware. I really like Sean Wilson too. So, I mean, my gosh, you get me started on Delaware receivers, and it's just kind of where do you start and end? Because I think it's a really and modern offenses in college football, you want to throw the ball, right? So I shouldn't necessarily paint it as, oh, this is really Delaware's thing and Delaware's thing only. But I do think that it really is going to be a heck of a competition at receiver, because you have experienced QBs who are back, and bring in some new receivers and see how they mesh, and then that'll help you distinguish who gets most of those yards. But the short answer is Thal, Patterson, LeBoy types. I would expect them to see the field early on.
Well, moving over to that tight end room, to someone that's never caught a Delaware football game, how would you describe how tight ends are utilized in the offense?
Tight ends are a fun story for Delaware in this Coach Carty era, because when Coach Carty first arrived, I know and I guess some others were wondering about the tight end spot. Would there be the prevalence or the existence of tight ends in the offense compared to what Sam Houston had, recruiting basically exclusively Texas down at Sam Houston? It wasn't necessarily the same type of athlete or the same type of number of athletes who would fit the tight end mold, maybe there, at least at that high FCS or G5 level in Texas. Not that you can't find every high school football player under the sun in Texas, but I just think for what the situation was at Sam, I don't think if my memory is correct, we were wondering, is Delaware going to be able to keep the number of tight ends that it already had on the roster in-house? And what it became is, and what we came to learn is, all right, in this recruiting footprint, in this setting, and how Delaware is going to set up the offense, the tight end is very much going to be present, but it's going to need to be able to do everything. I mean, it's going to need to be a player who is going to catch the ball in the short range of the field, short and intermediate game, and also be at the end of the O-line and run block, a player who can motion a fair bit as well, I would expect. So I really think the tight end, as much as depending on the body type for Delaware, I mean, if there's a tight end who's maybe a taller type, maybe a possession receiver type, or go further downfield, maybe you look at it as like a pass catching tight end. But I can think of a tight end, Connor Widoft, who transferred to Delaware for last season and is back this year, who took on that lead blocker type too. And I do expect Widoff to take a jump forward from what we heard in spring in terms of the versatility and pass catching too, and get him involved in feeling his full footing in the pass catching part of the offense. So I do think that it's not like every tight end has to be an A++ in every category, needless to say. But I do think that as a general matter, I mean, tight end's got to be one of the hardest positions to get on the field for in this Delaware offense, because there's a lot that's asked for what's a lot of times is one tight end on the field if we're talking 11. So I can think of a couple returning names as well, in addition to Widoff, who are going to be big factors. Caleb Fourier was a transfer from Colorado, who I view as like the pass catching tight end of the bunch. Elijah Sessoms is a Delaware native who is back on the team this year, and I think is like a little bit of everything. And it's kind of similar to St. Flora in my view, where Sessoms needs to be one of those guys who I think will continue to grow up into, I'm not saying mature grow up, but just age grow up into more and more opportunities on the field in games. So I do think Delaware's got a bit of a trio right now at tight end, and the tight end mold in the offense is very much a dose of everything.
Well, Daniel, looking at this offensive line, I'm a little bit nervous. In 2024, the room shuffled around due to injuries. However, besides left guard Patrick Shupp and tackle Anwar O'Neal, this room returns only 4 starts from 2024. Fenton Brose and Cole Schneider each saw 1 start, as Steven Dembowski had 2 starts under his belt. This room looks to be fairly seasoned in terms of like juniors, seniors, graduates that are just in this room, but it lacks kind of like that playing experience, I'd say. The staff only brought in 2 transfers, so that I could see. I guess I don't know if the roster is all updated there on the website, but after, I guess, given that, I assume that means the staff kind of likes the group of guys that they have there.
Yeah, I think what you raised from afar is a really key point, but it actually, in all, and I'm saying this like respectfully, like it's actually much the opposite in the way the staff views it. And the appearance is a little bit different than the reality, especially because of, you brought up Fenton Brose. Last fall for Delaware, Fenton Brose played in the 24 season. He played in 4 games, making 1 start. I mean, they were managing his eligibility. They wanted to make sure he's eligible for this FBS season in 2025, is my understanding, and my inference from just the Fenton Brose track record is they were just keeping a close eye and making sure that Fenton could be part of the picture here in this O-line in the Conference USA year. But Delaware did lose Brock Gingrich up front at center. Steven Dembowski got playing experience in games last fall, filling in for an injured Brock Gingrich. So Dembowski is going to be the starting center by every indication from spring now heading toward fall. So you do look at the center position is sort of a hybrid of, we're familiar with the player, but he doesn't have the same starting history as a Brock Gingrich, who was a multi-year starter and is now actually on the staff for Delaware as an offensive analyst. But overall, despite not having a starting center and also losing a starting guard in Bradley Anyanwu, Delaware still thinks of this offensive line as really the most experienced part of the offense. You look at Patrick Shupp, who's an extremely veteran guard for Delaware on its offensive line. Anwar O'Neal at a tackle spot for Delaware is probably one of like the star players for the team heading into this year, in terms of when he came into the program, people understood this is an clear FBS level talent and kind of size and mold for UD. And it was really a coup for Delaware to get O'Neal to eventually grow into that every day starting spot on the end of the offensive line. So I do think that with O'Neal having played last year too, Fenton Brose is back. A center who has had starts under his belt and was understood to kind of be the next in line behind Brock Gingrich. With those spots that are coming into their own, Anthony Kachase and Cole Snyder are back on the roster. They've played in games as well. So there are some players who are going to be making more starts and accruing more starts, but there's a lot of game experience still back. And I do think that Delaware feels good about the fact that they kind of strategically looked at the offensive line that had been so veteran at the end of the FCS era. How can we maximize as much as we can and keep it still a veteran style of O-line heading into the FBS? Because if there had to be a wholesale FBS era rebuild of the O-line, that would be tough sledding in some ways to adjust to those defensive fronts that you'll see in CUSA and in the FBS non-conference. I do think that Delaware thinks it's got the players with playing experience. They played beside each other. Communication being so important in the O-line. There won't be as much worry about miscommunication or learning curves for position changes. Like, no, this is more of hey, we know what we have in a lot of ways with the experience these players do have. So now with the higher challenge of the next level up, you still have the shared background of, okay, it's not our first time doing this. It's not our first rodeo. And there's also the comfort with the O-line and Delaware's returning QBs and running backs.
All right. Well, I feel a little bit better. So thank you there.
No doubt.
Daniel, who does this room look to as the leader of the offensive line?
It's really a great question, because I do think it's a benefit that Delaware has Gingrich on staff. He was just such a leader for the team at the center position, touching the ball, of course, every time, every snap. Nothing starts without a big body Brock, they called him, at the center spot. So who will be that leader on the offensive line? I'd have to say I'm just making forecasts here, because I think we'll have to see as the year gets started where that starts and ends. But I think Fenton Brose is a good example to start with. Talking about him earlier, the fact that he's a player we had circled, looking at a player who would stay with Delaware from 24 into 25. Fenton Brose's background is actually pretty interesting too, because he began playing both sides of the ball back in the Delaware's COVID season in the FCS. I mean, a defensive line background for Fenton Brose, now, of course, on the O-line. So the fact that he has that depth of experience, I do think that certainly makes him a candidate, I think, to be the type of leader, because having seen that much of college football on both sides, I mean, that's going to earn a lot of respect. And I know it already does. But Anwar O'Neal is that I guess it's possible that we see Brose and O'Neal at either tackle spot, bookending the offensive line. I say guess, just because I'd like to see how fall camp, ultimately shakes out and health shakes out. But I think Anwar O'Neal, the fact that he's a younger player, but this is that year that Delaware's been building toward for Anwar too. Like, this is going to be a time where I think it's going to be proof in the pudding as well at the FBS level for O'Neal. So I think that it'll just be, maybe not any one player will be the most obvious leader, but I think it's going to be pretty evenly distributed, because even a player like Cole Snyder on the offensive line for Delaware, originally, I want to say Montana State transferred to Delaware. I don't want to overlook Snyder either, because he is so versatile. I think he's one of those more versatile pieces, guard or tackle, really on either end if Delaware really needed to. So I do think that the offensive line has its most obvious leader. The previous starting center is not playing, but is now coaching. So there's leadership in that sense. And then there's just kind of a committee approach, I think, most importantly for this O-line in leadership this fall.
Daniel, if you had to pick an offensive player to have a breakout type season in 2025, who you got?
Well, I can't count Silver, because I think the preseason recognition is going to be there. I do think, the presumptive starting running back, I can't go that direction. It took me too long to mention Sean Wilson's name earlier. I think Sean Wilson at receiver is going to just be unleashed this year. I do think that at the receiver spot. So that's kind of one. It's not a knee-jerk pick, because I've been thinking about it, and I do think that I'm going to go with Wilson there in terms of calling it a breakout. First-year transfers to Delaware, you can say, well, if they're new to the Blue Hens, you call them breakout too. But I just think that I'm inclined to look at a returning youngster like a Sean Wilson for UD at receiver.
Well, let's move over to the defensive side of the ball. Those not familiar with Delaware's defense, can you describe the style and scheme that they run?
It'll be a 3-high safety defense. They call it the hashtag 3-high life, with defensive coordinator Manny Rojas. And Coach Rojas is actually the most veteran coach in terms of experience at Delaware over the years, in terms of Coach Rojas remaining at UD with Ryan Carty arriving as head coach for the 2022 season. So Coach Rojas has definitely an identity. This defensive identity is very well established at Delaware. The fact that Delaware has been running the 3-3-5 for this number of years, where it's, of course, the 3-man front, but then really is, I think the signature is the 3 high safeties. That has made it so that when Delaware is recruiting and recruits are looking at Delaware, kind of both sides know exactly what they're getting into. And Delaware is counting on the defense, an odd front with 3-man, but also being versatile enough to show 4 in terms of a new edge, maybe an outside linebacker creeping up and being that 4th man along the line. Delaware is counting on the variety in its defense, being part of what gives it success in being a novel opponent for a lot of these FBS programs Delaware is facing. Or, you haven't seen Delaware's defense recently, at least in many cases, because Delaware is in the new league and they're just debuting this fall, to state the obvious. So I do think that's part of the theme for Delaware this year, is on defense especially, and on offense really, the what the staff would like to say is a pretty unique setup in terms of scheme wise. Not that you don't see plenty of 3 safeties and you want to defend the pass, but I just think that Delaware is so committed to it and has really made it its signature and its standard operation on defense that UD is not going to change. You're not going to change what you see on the tape from the defense for Delaware is going to be what you get in the Colorado game this fall and then in CUSA games to follow.
Let's move over to the defense position groups, and we'll start with the guys up front along this defensive line. This group has a ton of guys coming back in terms of starters and depth. They look good on the interior and the edge. However, this group does lose a guy who created a lot of pressure last year on opposing quarterbacks, and Melkart Ubu-Jalde. Ubu-Jalde led the team in total pressures and sacks in 2024. He is now off to North Carolina. Daniel, what are your expectations for this defensive line heading into the season?
Well, with Delaware's base three-man front, it will be really important to see what happens in the middle of the defensive line for Delaware. I look at one of the key leaders for Delaware anchoring the middle will be Keyshawn Hunter, who has Delaware experience of, I guess all of a sudden it's already multiple years of Delaware experience. I think at this point, Keyshawn Hunter is going into his third season with Delaware. It's hard to imagine Keyshawn coming in actually, and you'll be familiar maybe with this name from Old Dominion. Justice Keyshawn Hunter, originally an ODU transfer. He comes out of the DC area to Delaware, and he has that nose tackle, FBS nose tackle size and attitude and leadership, and it's hard not to love Keyshawn Hunter for Delaware. Definitely is a player wearing number 9. A bigger guy to be wearing number 9 in terms. So he sticks out for sure in number 9 in the defensive line for UD. Jack Hall is back for Delaware as well, a really, really veteran player. Jack Hall wearing number 93, now a graduate out of Richmond, Virginia. And he has seen so much with this Delaware program. And I think that he can really be put at any of the 3 spots along the defensive line. So with Hall, Hunter, and then incorporating some sense of a replacement for Abu-Jalde, if you can replace that edge pressure. Looking at Noah Matthews, a defensive end out of Kentucky, who was originally a Delawarean for the Blue Hens. I do think that it'll be interesting to see how similar Matthews winds up profiling to Melkart. It doesn't have to be a one-for-one plugger. I'm not trying to unfairly make too many comps before we get into the year, but I think that's one part is Delaware didn't feel like it had to remake the wheel at defensive line, but it did address defensive end a little bit in the wake of having Melkart Abu-Jalde head to North Carolina. I do think that Dominic Bragna's a player who also should be mentioned at nose tackle, can come right in a rotation following up with Keyshawn Hunter. And Hunter has been injured and missed time in the past season. So Bragna's gotten plenty of experience too in games, and that's a plus for Delaware because I mentioned receivers rotating in, and then defensive linemen will be a cycle too where it's rotating in because if it's a 3-man front, you guys are taking on one-on-ones or maybe double teams with a little more frequency too. And so you want to get the juice in there from the sideline. So Delaware is going to try to show a lot of depth in terms of the defensive line. And the fan base has always had different reactions to the base 3-man look because kind of the assumption sometimes is, how are you going to get pressure? How are we going to wreak some havoc and get in the backfield with the 3-man front? But Delaware is also maybe even more so emphasizing the takeaways too. And if you can get enough of the confusion in the secondary and have a lot of the athletes who I think are some of Delaware's best at the linebacker and secondary group, then you can create the turnovers and get the ball right back. So I think that's where the trade-off comes, but there is talent on the D-line. I love Hunter as an FBS returnee. The fact that he gets to play FBS ball again, that's pretty big, I think. And then Jack Hall and also Noah Matthews as well on the defensive line.
With all those returners, who do you think the defensive line looks to as their leader?
I think Jack Hall and Keyshawn Hunter in combination, I think they fit well in terms of being a pair who can especially lead because Keyshawn, we mentioned, coming from a transfer background, and not that there's any shortage of transfers on the Delaware roster, but a lot of transfers who are back for multiple years with Delaware because part of it was building the Delaware roster with 2025 in mind. So a number of transfers who are, those going into last year, they were guys with 2 years of eligibility. So there's not, when I say transfers, sometimes the assumption might be like all new faces, very new, like brand new transfers, but having leadership from transfers who are returning transfers, if that makes any sense. And then also Jack Hall, that homegrown type and that just Delaware legacy name at some point. And when you look at the number of years it's been, when you factor in like the COVID year is still in the mix from so many years ago. So I think that it would be unfair necessarily go with one player on the D-line. I think that it's a D-line group that has a pretty fun culture. I want to shout out D-line coach Kyrie Hawkins because he calls it the trench mob and all of his members of the trench mob and what they want to get done up front in terms of creating havoc and being run stoppers too, first of all, because Delaware always, like any defense, wants to get you off schedule. And that's where you can start to get in passing downs and have that secondary that is really the calling card for Delaware start to pick off passes.
Well, if you're looking like for someone to kind of step up or kind of take their game to another level on this defensive line, who would that be here in 2025?
And I think, man, an elevating player, an elevating prospect along the defensive line. You could go any number of directions here. I think Keon Wright is one fun name to know, Keon Wright. They call him K5 as he returns to jersey number 5 for this year for Delaware. He's out of West Philadelphia, a local player, Keon Wright. I think that he's one of the players who are going to get more chances for Delaware. You saw rotations in sporadically, but I think now with another year under the belt and just getting more of a chance to rotate in, I think that'll be one step forward in that category. And then I want to make sure I don't miss another defensive lineman here along the front. That's been a name I've known. Nate Ray is a defensive end as well, out of Wilmington, Delaware. And I think just local interest there as well. And also, heck, this is the time where Delaware is going to need to be experimenting a little bit and see who rises to the occasion against these offensive lines that are a different kind of beast with size on average in the G5. So I do think that defensive line is one of the best places where you could have names pop up that haven't been necessarily the same kind of regular for Delaware in years past. So my pair of players there is going to be Keon Wright and then also looking at Nate Ray.
Well, the linebacker room is set up pretty nice as it returns a lot of experience in 2025. This room is highlighted by the return of their leading tackler from a season ago in Gavin Mole. One loss Delaware will be looking to fill is that of Ty Davis as he's off to Temple. How did this linebacking group look in the spring?
Yeah, Davis going to Temple is a tough loss because Casey Keeler, one-time Delaware coach, just name another Delaware player who winds up going up the road to be with the Owls there at the link. So, and I also should mention Andrew Pierce, now on staff at Temple as well. He had been Delaware's running backs coach, so kind of a help and maybe steering, getting Temple to pick up a couple hens. But that Davis mention is important because it's that maybe outside backer spot, that fluid roving type spot where Davis had a safety background, then moves up to linebacker and converts as needed. So I do think Delaware will turn to Blake Matthews, who's going to be a returnee who originally came to Delaware from Troy as a transfer. Blake Matthews, I think, will have a good look at an inside track to that outside linebacker spot for Delaware. But the middle of the linebacking spot is pretty well set with Dylan Traynor and Gavin Mole. I mean, Dylan Traynor's been at Delaware for a long number of years now. His older brother, Liam Traynor, was also a member of the linebacking group. So looking at Dylan Traynor being really a heartbeat type and is going to be in the middle on every down as long as he's healthy. And Gavin Mole right beside him. And Mole was the player who you could see was growing up into being that running mate with Traynor. And that's now the fact that combination is there in the center of the defense is pretty big time for Delaware and for Coach Manny Rojas to set things up. But I do think that it's a linebacking group that's got some more latent potential too, because it's going to be a group that's important to be in combination and concert with the 3-man front. You'll see who's going to be the maybe the linebacker who's on the blitz most often, or who's the linebacker who supports the safety blitzes as well. It's a little bit to be determined, but I do think that the linebacker group, the clear headliners are Traynor and Mole.
Well, for those not familiar with Mole, what does he exactly mean to this defense?
I mean, the fact that he became one of those guys who just got so many snaps where he's kind of all over the field, is able to track the ball well. He's able to have a nose for the football and takeaways as well. I view him from the conversations I can remember, really like he's a quieter type in terms of the conversations we had in like a media sense. I guess I can't speak for like the locker room necessarily, but definitely a good leadership by example from a player who took a big step last year. So it's really like a building block now for Mole. So he does mean a lot. That's for sure. There's no question about it. The fact that he rose to the occasion and kind of fit the billing of what it was, one of those guys where it's like, okay, one to watch. And then he justified it. That's for sure. So I do think that that's definitely a name and a player where it's one of Delaware's spots where it's hanging its hat on.
Well, similar to the rest of this defense, the secondary looks to be in good shape heading into the season. They look to replace Tyron Herring at cornerback, but all the other starters are returning. It's highlighted by the return of safety KT Say, who led this team in interceptions with 4, and cornerback Nate Evans, who led the team in pass breakups with 7. What should we expect from this defensive backfield here in 2025?
I expect seeing a lot of KT Say for sure at safety, and Jason Scott at safety as well, a returning starter for Delaware, who Scott originally gained to Delaware from Boston College. So it's kind of like the fact that we've now gone through, I guess it's been since late 2023 when Delaware announced its FBS transition. I mean, you can see now as we get closer to fall 2025 where the sheer number of, oh, he has this pedigree from this transfer background and oh, he has this much Delaware experience already. I mean, it's been a build to where the safety group is experienced in that way as well. Having the return of Say, having the return of Scott, having the return of my son Pollard, who arrived at Delaware as a transfer and got in and to play last fall, and is also the ability to return the football on special teams. My son Pollard can bring that too. It's a safety group that is I would say a featured group of the defense because Delaware has typically been pretty strong up the middle at linebacker and safety in the Rojas era at DC. I mean, that's if I think of the defense, that's what I think of is up the middle, the linebackers, and then the safeties, but especially the safeties when you look at Say. I mean, if he were a little bit taller, I mean, he might not have started at Delaware to begin with. He might have started at a power level program to start with. And he, I mean, you know, he might not, I'm speculating. This is not like me knowing what his future plans are, but you never know with the way it is now. If KT Say makes this much noise as the preseason buzz has been, you know, in CUSA, then Delaware might, you know, it's always trouble to hold on to guys like that too. So just that's the kind of talent you're talking about in terms of being able to point the football or high point the football and grab interceptions like KT Say can. But it's not just Say. I mean, it's Hassan Manning, who's also a player who was an FBS caliber recruit and started at Delaware and has built up at Delaware over multiple years now. He's a player I look forward to watching at safety as well. Delaware moved Anthony Crenshaw up from safety to linebacker, maybe in a little bit of a mimicking of what happened with Ty Davis too, is a versatile safety who was kind of hitting like a linebacker too and can tackle like a linebacker. Why not boost the linebacker depth after losing Davis? So I do think that the safety grouping is going to be headlined by, you know, those all conference types or the preseason all conference types with Say. But I wonder if it's almost like, as everybody's sort of getting used to looking at this Delaware roster, you kind of find one player at each position, but I think it's more about the sum of the parts. I do think that the balance of the Delaware defense in the secondary is pretty nice because there's a good number of starts returning. There really is at safety. And I think that that's huge. If you're going to play the number of safeties Delaware does, the guys out there, the Jimmies and Joes are going to make a big difference, needless to say.
Well, you were excited earlier about the secondary, and you kind of alluded to it just a moment ago, but let's say there's a guy in the secondary that earns Conference USA first team all conference in 2025. Who do you think that would be?
Say is like the easy cop-out answer because I do think sometimes these preseason accolades, as long as the player kind of, it's weird to say holds up his end of the bargain, but just is a baseline same production as the previous season, you can kind of pencil him in for maybe not first team, but some level of all conference. So I don't even necessarily want to go there. It's not disrespect. It's just to maybe give some other shine to some other names. I do think at corner, as Delaware plays post Tyron Herring, who was originally a Dartmouth transfer and winds up now getting an NFL chance with the Packers. I do think as Delaware fills in for Herring at cornerback, I think a Corey Lyde is a player who should get a shout. He originally got to Delaware as a Wisconsin transfer, so you have that power conference history, but it's also Corey Lyde's been at Delaware multiple years now, so he's able to have, I think, step in at that spot too, opposite Nate Evans perhaps. So I think that at least one of those two corners, Nate Evans or Corey Lyde, will wind up getting a level of all conference in postseason because I think that there's going to be that room to step up. I mean, Tyron Herring was that all league type corner previously for Delaware. And I do think that the snaps are there and the abilities there for the combination of Evans and of Lyde to garner recognition by the end of the year. But for first team, I do think they'll have to play really well, certainly to earn first team at corner, because there are a lot of other corners in this league who are used to playing the FBS schools every week. And so we just don't have that proof yet from Delaware quite yet. But I do think that the corners room should be able to put together at least one, have an all conference year.
All right, Daniel, if you had to pick a defensive player to have a breakout type season in 2025, who you got?
One breakout. It may be even named I didn't even mention just yet. Another transfer into cornerback for Delaware is Keontae Jenkins, who came in from Coastal Carolina. And I do think that when you look at Delaware's corners, whether it was Tyron Herring, who got in from Dartmouth, I mentioned, or a Khalil Dawsey, who not that long ago transferred in the Cardi era and came in from Harvard. And I guess I shouldn't say plugged and played immediately, as if they didn't have to put a lot of effort into it, but you wouldn't have known it, right? Like it went in and it clicked and it worked quickly. So I do think that Keontae Jenkins, if all goes well in fall camp and everything gets established and there's momentum there, I like the odds of the chance where that becomes a quicker name for even Delaware fans to have to get to learn, because he's new to Newark, Delaware. So I think that's a chance for a breakout if we're keeping it on the perimeter and in the secondary.
Well, we've talked offense and defense. Now let's move over to the special teams. How are those units looking, and are there any concerns?
Well, I mentioned JoJo Bermudez transferring out of Delaware. So that losing that speedster, you want to make sure that your return specialists are all in order on kickoff returns. I associate Bermudez with those kickoff returns, and now he's not going to be an option for Delaware in that respect. So you look at Jakari Kelly, who was a receiver I mentioned coming out of the slot on offensive formations. Kelly can be a kick returner for Delaware, I would expect. Donovan Lewis is a wide receiver, I should mention, who has really put in his dues and has really grinded it out, and I think can get a good number of chances possibly on kick returns as well. So, and having fallback on punt returns, I do think Delaware has that in order. But when Delaware's kicking the football, it's Nate Reed, who's a pretty cool story, originally transferring from East Stroudsburg to Delaware, so up to Division I, and now Nate Reed will find himself as the everyday place kicker for Delaware in the FBS. And he's a touchback machine on kickoffs. I mean, Nate Reed is really a reliable field position resource for Delaware, and as also just settled in, I think, in the place kicking game. I think his range, a pretty standard range. I don't think it's like I don't circle field goal kicking for Delaware and say like, oh, Justin Tucker is an extreme example because I'm a Ravens guy and I'm near Baltimore. But like, I'm not saying that anybody in the college game has to have Tucker range. But what I'm getting at is I don't look at Delaware's field goal kicking game as necessarily the longest range, also because Delaware is so prone to go for it on fourth down in fourth and short situations, just inside the opponent's territory. Delaware will oftentimes go for it on fourth down, not necessarily as a lack of faith in Nate or any other kicker, but more so just you don't see Delaware attempt as many field goals in general. So I don't have the sample size to necessarily say, oh, this is the exact range for Nate Reed. But I would think that Nate Reed's got that standard, 40 yards from, 40 yards in, 35 yards in, you feel pretty good about what you're doing, especially 35 yards and in, I would say. But I do think that there's experience there. I mean, there's experience, and that's a good thing at kicking, especially when all of a sudden Delaware's entering all these new atmospheres, right? And all these new settings and these new sight lines for stadiums, and maybe even these new wind patterns, and the geographic area is different, and all the conditions for kicking are different. So having a guy like Nate Reed, who's just a very much I think a confident player and a relaxed personality, it's going to be a good situation for Delaware at kicker. And at punter, Delaware will have to make sure that it has everything in order with the incoming punter, Brendan Locke, transferring in, helping Delaware out after Josh Cupid dealing with just being unavailable after having to have a procedure done in the off season. So I look at Locke as being the punter for Delaware, and he was productive below the D1 level. So Delaware at this point, man, it's been a crazy run of transfer punters for over I'm losing track of the number of years now. It feels like Delaware has been just going to the portal for every starting punter. Back to there was a South Dakota State transfer, a Monmouth transfer. Cupid was a Towson transfer. Now you're going below D1. So I think that Delaware feels good about its diagnosing of transfer punters and what you're putting on video in the college game. So I have not gotten to see Locke punt yet, but I do think that Delaware is pretty confident in its evaluation of these punters, because there have been a pretty good number of all conference type transfer punters who have had success at Delaware. And that'll be very necessary, because field position, anything to give Delaware an edge in these close margins when Delaware is getting adjusted to this new schedule, it'll be important. So I guess I sound like, oh gosh, I'm going on and on about even the punters, but it just is one of those things where all these pieces need to add up for Delaware to have the success of what should be close games in its first year in this league.
Well, now that spring practice is over, which position group or groups do you think is the most concerning heading into the season?
Yeah, the single most concerning, it's hard to pick one. Maybe, and I'm not even just saying with blue and gold colored glasses on, it may sound like it. You're probably thinking, I mean, gosh, this guy, is he going to pick a single group? But I do think that the way it's been balanced, the roster construction in the last year has had this season in mind. And I'm not saying that guarantees this is going to make it a huge roaring success, but like, they managed to win 9 games last season, but all the while there was still this this overarching approach to making sure that everything was going to be as great as it can be for the big debut in the FBS level. So even though I think it's a balanced roster, I do think that at defensive line, if you talk to the fan base, and I think this is fair in some instances, not that there's not a lot of talent on the defensive line, but just let's say Keyshawn Hunter, hopefully not, but what if the injury bug comes back to Keyshawn Hunter at the nose tackle spot? And what if Delaware, after losing Melkart, Abujalde to transfer on the defensive end spot, what happens if the defensive line, as it faces these bigger O-lines, what if their injuries pile up there? And then you're looking at, when you're only playing 3 men up front to begin with, well, typically, not exclusively, but if you're playing a base 3-man front, if the depth is maybe diminished at the D-line spot, that would be a question mark. It would be because there's a lot that's asked of Delaware's secondary that I love going on and on about. But if Delaware's secondary is being asked to, hang in coverage that much longer against more FBS athletes who are, you think Delaware is the only one who's spreading you out and throwing the ball around in the Southeast. You mean, you'd be kidding yourself, right? So if Delaware is having to defend a lot of these talented offenses too. So what happens if, the depth is tested on the D line? That would be interesting to circle, because I do think that it's not quite the same history as the Delaware recent history as the Delaware linebackers and secondary, where I really have the mental picture of that's where the Rojas defense kind of can make its lunch. But there's not to say the defensive line doesn't have a lot of good options. I mean, I should have said a long time ago when we were talking about it, Ethan Saunders. I mean, Ethan Saunders is a great leader for Delaware on the D line, a guy who, if I recall correctly, I mean, he'd like to be a coach at some point in the after playing career. And he's got that just good leadership, definitely a good leadership skills and the infrastructure to be a coach. So I do think that it's not like there aren't a good number of the Joes to fill the spot to the D line, but just it's one of those places where do you physically hold up well? Much like the O line, much like the offensive line, does Delaware hold up? And that's kind of like the FBS transition cliche: is can you hold up in the trenches when we do have history of Delaware having to play some really strong trench teams in the FCS playoffs, like South Dakota State and Montana, and it doesn't go well because those teams are recruiting at a different level in the trenches, and their identity is maybe more ground centric, and they can recruit in the Midwest and the upper Midwest and really lock into the bigger bodies. And so that's not the league that Delaware is getting into right now in CUSA, but there does show a little bit of, hey, on the defensive line and to some extent on the offensive line, is there that ability to hang in there when you're getting late in games and people want to lean on you?
In today's age of NIL, revenue sharing, and the transfer portal, how have you seen it change Delaware's recruiting philosophy?
Those factors definitely play a role. I do think so. I don't want to be dismissive of them, but when I was reflecting on that, I would say really the bigger change in the recruiting philosophy came because of the FBS transition. And with the geographic footprint, Delaware's talked about, the fact that it's been a name that's been out there, certainly at the high 1AA level, and has had a history and a pedigree and has had good fan support over years. But now you can open more doors into more states in some of the richest recruiting regions of the country, and you can get people to listen. You get people to maybe stick on the line and hear about what Delaware has to offer, because it's new and emerging at this next level. And there's a staff that has ties to Texas from Coach Carty's and his assistants' time at Sam Houston. It's a staff that's able to designate recruiting areas in Florida too. So I think that even more than the portal, which is itself an example of this, because Delaware is built with FBS transfers along the way too, heading into this fall, I do think more so than just the financials of it, which Delaware has invested in through the 302 collective and through the eventual, now the opted-in situation in the settlement. I do think that now it's going to be go time in terms of seeing the way the roster construction comes to light in this fall. But that roster has been, I think, most influenced just by the level up, because Delaware was already it knew what it wanted in terms of the Carty offense and the Rojas defense. But now you're going to see, hey, how much of a difference is it now where there are more players who are going to be able to feel like, hey, I'm going to listen. I'm going to really hear out Delaware, because if I really want that FBS level, well, now I don't have to choose between that level and UD. It's like it's one and the same. And even though UD is brand new to it, hey, I mean, they're in the video game, and they're going to be lining up against some people who have been able to have quick success in CUSA too, like a Jax State and like a Sam Houston. So I think that that's been the biggest shift, is you can see where the geographic diversity is opening up for Delaware, and it's the number of players that can pull in. And you're also seeing the chance for kind of some more pieces, and just more pieces, period, more scholarships to work with at what used to be scholarship limits, I guess I should say, in light of the settlement. But I think all in all, the biggest change has to do with, it really feels like it's all at once, but especially the FBS move coming in concert with the changing financial dynamics and with the way the portal works now.
Well, Daniel, we've talked about it littered around this whole podcast about the move up to the FBS and Conference USA. What does the fan base think about this move up?
What to understand about the Delaware fan base, I mean, my background having grown up in it and being part of the community is it's a very proud fan base with a lot of history and tradition and passion for Delaware football, and winning expectations come with that. I mean, this Delaware football has been the show in town in Newark, Delaware for generations of families. So there's a lot of expectation that Delaware should have winning records year in and year out at a minimum. And at the FCS, that meant having playoff access yearly. And that wasn't always the case in some middling years I can remember in my time following the team throughout the 2010s. But I do think that with this FBS move, as long as Delaware proves, heck, we're in it because we can actually compete. And it's not just a desperation grab and, this is the last chance to move up and, the financials and dollars and cents of a TV deal. If even the more skeptical sides of the Delaware fan base can be shown that this program can hang with those Conference USA programs and with those programs who also recently moved up, then the fan base will definitely be into it. But there's already a lot of energy and excitement about it in general. I don't want to say the mood is sour at all, because there's a lot of certainly optimism, but I do think it's some cautious optimism in some senses, because Delaware did have its fair share of struggles with top-tier fellow CAA football rivals in the FCS. Villanova, plaguing Delaware in that rivalry series that Delaware just seemed to be snake-bitten in. You look at Delaware's struggles against William & Mary and Richmond and Elon, those other regularly competitive CAA football schools. That means some Delaware fans will say, well, FBS is great and all, and the glitz and glamour, the video game and the TV spots, but what does that mean if we're not upholding the winning tradition of Delaware football? So I think that's a fair question for a lot of the fan base, and it's going to be left to be answered in part and in many ways this fall. But I do think there's excitement about rejuvenating the regular season schedule, because getting UConn in non-conference for this fall is major. I mean, that renews a rivalry that was from the Yankee Conference days, and getting that back in Delaware Stadium, getting the Huskies and the Hens together, that's pretty big time for this program. Also looking at getting JMU back on the schedule for home and homes in the future. I mean, that's a rivalry in CAA football, and Delaware really wants to catch up to what JMU's been able to accomplish in the G5, because they built it that way and were the class of CAA football at the end of the Duke's time there. I mean, everybody listening to this show knows that. Certainly I know there was a JMU episode that was already done. So I think that's sort of part of it too, is the fan base really wants to win. I mean, new level, great. They don't want to be a doormat. I mean, who wants to be a doormat? But especially where it's a history where Delaware is supposed to be a prouder tradition than that, for sure. And then two is setting aside the confusion of, or not the confusion, but the concern about, well, the postseason isn't the same. There's not the access in all likelihood to the FBS playoff, right? I mean, the reality is that the postseason is the Conference USA title game, and the bowl game structure is going to be the year-to-year goal. But the regular season, despite the postseason taking a step back probably for Delaware fans, the regular season gets an influx of energy, because the CAA membership had changed so much, and it wasn't the same number of times you'd play rivals and get the same history with those schools. Now in the FBS, Delaware gets a chance to play at a higher exposure level, and that excites everybody, I think. And it also excites the fact that you can get the CUSA pairing, but also the non-conference pairings, and just make it so that that FBS Northeast corridor, for what it is, or Mid-Atlantic corridor, can include the Blue Hens, and you can include Temple on the schedule in future years. I mean, that's major too. Temple Delaware was a heated rivalry before my time. I know that good and well. So getting that back going in the 95 stretch up to Philly, that's major. So it's a mixed reviews fan base, I would think, because it would be inaccurate for me to say, everything's all rainbows and everybody's assuming the best, and everybody loves FBS. I mean, everybody sees the upside in FBS, but everybody also wants to certainly get going with getting wins and justifying the fact that UD can puff its chest out a little bit in the video game and stuff like that.
Well, what do you think the main strength of this 2025 team will be?
I think on offense, Coach Carty, an offensive head coach, you look at the fact that I do think Delaware is going to score points this year. I mean, CUSA, sometimes it's like a cliche, maybe like a profile or a stereotype of a Southeastern G5 league. Like, it's offense. It's offense in Texas and Georgia. But I do think, the Carty system fits that. And I do think Delaware is going to be ready to put up points. Marker and Minakuchi back at QB. Braden Streeter's a young QB who actually got a couple game reps last year. So it's not as if Delaware comes in with a bunch of question marks at QB. So you start there. Offensive line, we went over. Offensive line, actually, despite the appearance on the surface, it does have some gameplay that's under its belt and probably is actually the most experienced, cohesive unit of anybody on offense. So that's, you check the QB box, the O-line box, running back with Silver and others. Receivers are more than we can count, and I probably spent too much time on that earlier. So I do think, not to make light of the schedule, which is a challenging CUSA schedule for Delaware, the draws are pretty tough. You miss Missouri State and Kennesaw State, and instead you're playing Jack State and Sam Houston, who have been good lately, despite not knowing what you're going to get with new staffs this year. You're playing Western Kentucky, you're playing Liberty. So the schedule is really rough, but or it could have the potential to be really rough. But that doesn't mean that Delaware is not going to score points, because the trajectory of this offense in the Carty era has been that and again, part of that is Delaware beating up on some lesser CEA opponents and actually not having the same success against the best CEA defenses. So there is some yellow flag cause for concern in terms of, let's prove it against the those class of the CUSA type of teams. But I do think that all in all, Delaware is typically good for like 400 yards a game on offense when everything is right. I mean, you're looking at pretty reliably, this is a Carty-led scheme and Carty play calling operation that is good for turning up the yards, and it's a matter of converting in the red zone. The red zone is really where Delaware is going to make its money, because you have seen Delaware's offenses slow down a little bit, or sometimes get roadblocks in the red zone or in short yardage. Short yardage or red zone. If you're a spread attack, it's a little different once you get condensed in the area of the field, deeper into the opponent territory. So the yardage is going to be there, I think. So I think that's the strength. You're going to see Delaware move the ball, but what's going to happen when push comes to shove and you're in close quarters, you're in short yardage against these FBS-sized defenses?
Well, Daniel, what does success look like for the Fighting Blue Hens here in 2025?
I think in the abstract, it's always 500 or better. Even if you're new to the FBS, nobody at Delaware wants to have a losing season. And that when that happens, heads roll in Newark. So I do think that 500 or better is the minimum, especially when you're looking at, hey, the regular season is what Delaware has. No Conference USA title game, and then very low chance that, hey, maybe if there aren't enough teams who are bowl eligible, then Delaware can backdoor it despite not being formally postseason eligible this year either. So you look at it, it's all about the regular season. Much like last year was all about the regular season. This is all about the regular season again, and about having a proof of concept for this coming fall. So I think 500 or better. And a big part of that will be how Delaware starts in the early part of the schedule. Let's say Delaware splits against Delaware State and against Colorado in the opening games. Let's say it's 1-1 record from there. Then you're looking at hosting UConn and going to FIU. That back-to-back weeks is going to be so enormous. UConn, a regional non-conference game at home, the first FBS team coming to Delaware Stadium in so many years, and for the first time in this era. And then you look at the conference opener at FIU. Now, FIU doesn't have the same recent success as the Western Kentucky and Liberty and Sam and JSU convo I mentioned a little bit earlier. So FIU is a new coach and should be improved and has talent, that's for sure. And you're going a long trip on the road, so I'm not making light of it. But can Delaware, in a kind of a moderate part of its schedule, I look at UConn and FIU as like the moderate range of the schedule, like not the same peak difficulty as Liberty and WKU, but still moderately difficult. Can Delaware get at least one of those? Take at least one of those. If they go back-to-back, if Delaware wins at home against UConn and then goes to FIU, can that jumpstart things where once you hit October and the midweek games, you at least have the momentum of having won a couple games already, have a little bit of confidence under your belt from the success on the field, and then go from there. So that would be the game plan for Delaware, I think, to get it to 500 at least, is to at least win one of the UConn and FIU games. And UConn's been so much better lately too that you can't rule out UConn coming on the road to Delaware either. They're going to be looking. The last thing they want to do is lose to a brand new FBS school. So UConn's going to be a tough out for Delaware. And I can see Delaware being an underdog in both the games that I'm talking about. But if UD takes one of those two, or ideally from a Delaware perspective, both of those games, then maybe you're looking at a situation where that's a track record toward 500 or more. Because if you take both of those UConn FIU games, maybe then you only need to steal one or two out of the toughest quartet of games I've been mentioning, which is Liberty, Western, Jack State, and Sam. But also, there's a power conference game in November against Wake. So it's not exactly an easy schedule. You got to play 2 power games this year. So that's my crazy long road winding through the schedule to say there are a bunch of tough road trips in there. You don't play a couple of the newer schools in Kennesaw and Mo State. So a lot's on Delaware's shoulders early in the year. Historically, under Carty, Delaware's had fast starts, had like unbeaten starts in the early October and through early October. Now, part of that was strength of schedule or lack thereof, but out of the gates has been pretty good for Delaware. I mean, Delaware's first game under Carty was a win at Navy in an FCS FBS upset. So the starts have been good, but that needs to apply against UConn and FIU in order for Delaware to have success this year. I really think so. Because by the time it gets to be late in the year, who knows who's playing quarterback for Delaware once it's November? The history of Delaware quarterbacking says somebody's going to be hurt. A second guy's going to be hurt. You're going to be playing a third QB or a freshman. So honestly, chances are you're really going to want to stack wins if you can early on to get the mojo going.
Daniel, we've covered a lot of ground today, but is there anything else you want to share, think that we should know about this 2025 Delaware Blue Hens football team?
Well, my only concern is I've probably already taken you guys longer than your prior episode, so I apologize for that. If I should have warned you that I'm gonna cover probably ranging a little bit too far. But I think that on balance for Delaware, it's a coaching staff, but we actually didn't talk about too many of the coaches. It's a coaching staff that has a lot of continuity. Only losing Andrew Pierce, that running back coach, as Coach Pierce went to Temple, like we mentioned a little bit ago. Xavier Dye comes in from Coastal Carolina to coach running backs for Delaware. So other than that, it really is a spot where this staff with Coach Carty has been in place and been together since the 2022 season. So you have multiple FCS years before now all of a sudden now it needs to be, the FBS train here in 2025. So I think that that's kind of a part that I should mention, because I think there's peace of mind where the players can see, okay, these are the familiar same voices. It's the same identity as the program. It's the same schemes on either side, by and large. We just need to show what we got, and prove that we can hang with these guys in CUSA. And the fact that you have continuity at the run game coordinator spot, the O-line coach for Delaware is Chris Rogers, and he run game coordinates. Sean Goldrich, I mentioned, is the QB's coach. He's the pass game coordinator. The fact that even those like specialized coordinator spots are still the same, it's pretty big, because Delaware has had offensive success where you might have thought, Coach Archer might get a look elsewhere out of his OC spot. And Sean Goldrich has been so good with these QBs, maybe he'll become an OC somewhere. And that may happen someday, and I'm sure Delaware would be very proud. But to have the continuity for right now of having the staff together and being united with Coach Carty, and frankly, having the financial resources to be able to pay these FBS assistants and FBS assistant salary pool, that's a big deal too, because that's part of doing this thing right, is making sure that Coach Carty has the assistance he needs to keep the continuity all together.
Well, Daniel, I don't think you need to apologize for talking a lot about Delaware, because our fans, our listeners, the people who tune into this, they want to know Delaware. They want to get to know this team and every aspect of it. So, we just want to say thank you for your time that you took out of your day to spend with us and share your knowledge. We greatly appreciate it. But before we let you go, we want to give you an opportunity to highlight the work that you've been doing over at the Feathers and Field Goals podcast, or highlight anything that you have coming up.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a blast, guys. I really appreciate it. It's been a while since I've gotten to do one of these, and I apologize to our listeners, only in the sense that maybe like 0.5 speed for my crazy my pace. Maybe I'm like the Coach Carty pace on offense. I know. I guess I go a little fast, so maybe the playback speed will be valuable for folks. But anyhow, no. Feathers and Field Goals podcast. Check it out. I appreciate the plug there on screen. You can search up Feathers and Field Goals on Instagram and on Twitter. And we'll be posting there more as we begin our new season of recordings beginning in early August. So we'll be rebooting that. My co-host, Bryce Leslie, shout out to him. He just got married earlier this summer. So now with our other co-host who's going to be joining us and the girlfriend there on that co-host side, and my other co-host is married, I'm the only bachelor now on the show. So it's kind of funny that all that adds up on Feathers and Field Goals. That means we're going to have a good time. That's for sure. I'll bring that bachelor energy to the show. And it'll be a Delaware football big time with some content coming out starting in August. And then we'll do weekly during the season too. So if you want to kind of keep an eye on what Delaware is doing there in CUSA, we'll be recording over at Feathers and Field Goals.
Awesome. Well, if you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. If you're listening in podcast form, please rate and review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Amazon Music. Thank you all for your support. And until the next time, we are the G5 Hive.
Go fight for Delaware. Fight for